23 German soldiers, spread across a quarter mile of mountain trail in the Italian Apennines, every single one of them killed with a single wound. Not a boot print, not a crushed branch, not a broken twig. The snow had fallen an hour after sunrise, like powder that should have held tracks for days. But there was nothing, just bodies, just silence, and the kind of cold that makes your rifle feel like it weighs twice what it should. January 1944, a staff sergeant with the 36th Infantry Division stood over those bodies and realized he was looking at something that shouldn't have been possible. 23 men, one killer, no trace. The Germans had a name for him, Der Apache. The Americans didn't know his name at all. What you're about to hear comes from a first-hand account, declassified after 70 years. Cross-referenced with German POW interrogations and intelligence reports that were buried in archives until quite recently. This isn't legend. This is documented history, the strange parts of it, the parts that don't fit neatly into the textbooks. First, you'll discover how an entire German division became terrified of a ghost they couldn't catch, couldn't track, and couldn't kill. Then, you'll hear about the promise that turned one American soldier into something the enemy had never encountered before. A hunter who left no trace, who struck without warning, who disappeared like smoke. And finally, you'll understand what it cost him. Because men like this don't come back from the edge unchanged. Some of them don't come back at all. This is the story of Private First Class Joseph Nish, a man who was supposed to have died in November 1943, a man who instead fought his own private war 4 months, alone, in the worst terrain imaginable, against impossible odds. And it all started with 3 words. Der Apache. That's what German prisoners called him when they were interrogated. They said it with the kind of tone you use when you're talking about something that frightens you, but you don't want to admit it. Always singular, never plural. One man, maybe American, maybe Italian, maybe just a ghost. The pattern was unmistakable. Every 3 or 4 days, another German patrol would fail to report back. Search parties would find them hours later, sometimes a full day later, scattered along a trail or grouped in a clearing. Clean kills. Professional. Efficient. Single stab wounds to the base of the skull. Crushed larynxes. Broken necks. No defensive wounds. No spent casings. No blood trails leading away. And crucially, no footprints. Captain Hollis, the company commander, spread a map across his folding table one frozen morning in January. 15 red circles marked 15 incidents over 6 weeks. All within a 10-mile radius. German patrols ranging from 4 men to 30. The larger groups hit at night. The smaller ones in broad daylight. I need you to find him, Hollis said to the staff sergeant. Whoever this is, he's operating in our sector. If he's one of ours, I want him accounted for. If he's not, I want to know what we're dealing with. The sergeant took 4 men into the mountains. What they found would change how they understood courage, how they thought about duty, and what one man could do when pushed beyond every reasonable limit. But first, they had to follow the bodies. Before we continue, a quick word. If you're the kind of person who wants to hear stories like this, stories about the men who fought in the margins, in the gaps between the major battles, the ones who don't make it into the history books, then you're exactly who we make these videos for. Every week, we dig into declassified documents, track down first-hand accounts, and uncover what really happened when the cameras stop rolling. Stories like Joseph Nish's don't get told unless someone takes the time to find them. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now back to January 1944 and the hunt for the ghost. The reconnaissance team moved out before dawn, following German supply trails through the Apennines. The mountains in winter are brutal, sharp ridges, narrow valleys, pine forests so thick you can walk 10 feet from a road and disappear completely. So, perfect country for an ambush. Perfect country for dying alone. They found the first body around mid-morning. A German soldier, face down in the snow, his rifle still slung across his back. Single puncture wound to the base of the skull, angled upward. Death would have been instant, no sign of a struggle. Corporal Dietrich scanned the surrounding trees whilst the team medic checked the body. No tracks, Dietrich said quietly. Nothing coming in, nothing going out, just the Germans' own trail. How is that possible? Walk on ice, walk on rocks, step carefully on hard surfaces. When snow comes and goes, any marks you do leave fill in fast. But it takes time. It takes patience. More patience than most men have when they're trying to kill someone. Half a mile further down, they found 3 more. Same method. Same precision. 2 had been killed within seconds of each other. The 3rd had made it maybe 10 yards before going down. He's hunting them, the medic said, looking back the way they'd come. Following their patrols, waiting for the right moment, taking them one by one. The survivors probably don't even know their friends are gone until it's too late. Then why leave the bodies? Why not hide them? Because he wanted them found. Psychological warfare makes them nervous, makes them second-guess every shadow, every sound, breaks down unit cohesion before a single shot is fired. Dietrich found something. Not a print exactly, more like a pattern. The snow disturbed in a line, very faint, leading toward a rock face. Something had brushed against it recently. The line led to a narrow gap between 2 boulders. Beyond that was a steep slope covered in loose shale and patches of ice. Impossible to climb without making noise. Impossible to descend without leaving a trail. But the disturbance ended at the gap. Whoever had made it had either stopped there or found another way. He knows this ground, the sergeant said. Every rock, every tree. He's been here long enough to memorize it. Over the next 2 days, they worked a grid pattern. They found more bodies. German patrols, always small groups, always killed with surgical efficiency. Knives mostly. A few looked like they'd been taken down with bare hands, the kind of kills you see from someone trained in close combat. Someone who knows anatomy and leverage, and how to end a fight in seconds. But they never found tracks. They never found campsites. They never found so much as a dropped piece of equipment. The ghost wasn't giving them anything. You know what's interesting about stories like this? Most people never hear them. They watch the big World War II films, see the famous battles, and move on. But you're still here, which tells me you're someone who actually cares about honoring these men properly. Not just as characters in a story, but as human beings who did extraordinary things. That's exactly why this channel exists. We're building a community that refuses to let these stories fade away. Stories about men like Joseph Niche, who fought wars most people never knew existed. If that sounds like something you want to be part of, subscribe. Now let me tell you about the night everything changed. On the 3rd night, the reconnaissance team took shelter in a small cave halfway up a ridge. The temperature had dropped well below freezing. The wind was picking up. One of the privates was shaking so badly he couldn't hold his rifle, hypothermia setting in. The sergeant took the watch himself. The moon was up, nearly full, bright enough to cast shadows across the valley below. The snow had a blue tint to it in the moonlight. Almost beautiful if you ignored the fact that it was cold enough to kill you. Then he heard the sound, soft, rhythmic, metal on stone, very faint, coming from somewhere above and to the left. He turned slowly, bringing his rifle up, safety off. The sound stopped. Then he saw him, 70 yards up the slope, moving across a rock face that should have been impossible to traverse in daylight, let alone at night. No ropes, no pitons, just hands and feet finding holds invisible from below. He moved like water, smooth, silent, never hesitating, medium build. Lean, wearing a mix of German and American kit. A rifle across his back, knife on his belt. He stopped, hanging from the rock face with one hand, and turned his head toward the cave, toward the sergeant. They looked at each other across the distance. The sergeant had his rifle up, sight picture clear. Center mass, easy shot. He could have taken it, should have taken it. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way the man moved, the absolute confidence, the complete lack of fear. Maybe it was the fact that he'd already seen the sergeant, already knew he was there, and hadn't tried to hide. Or maybe it was just instinct. The sense that this wasn't a moment for shooting. The man held his gaze for maybe 5 seconds. Then he nodded, just slightly, and continued across the rock face. 10 seconds later, he was gone, swallowed by shadows and distance. The sergeant sat there with his heart hammering, finger still near the trigger, trying to process what he'd just seen. When dawn came and they broke camp, the sergeant knew they weren't going to find this man unless he wanted to be found. It was Private Mendez who found the first real clue, a scrap of fabric, olive drab, torn from an American uniform, tangled in a bush maybe 3 feet off the ground, fresh, no more than a day old. He came through here moving fast, Mendez said, fast enough to catch on the thorns and not notice. Or he left it on purpose, a trail marker, for us. They followed the ridge for another mile. The terrain got rougher, steeper, harder to navigate. When they reached an overhang, the sergeant looked down and saw what they were meant to find. A camp, small, carefully concealed beneath a rock shelf that kept it hidden from aerial observation. A single bedroll, a small fire pit, cold, the ashes scattered and buried. Food wrappers from American rations, folded and tucked under a stone. A canteen, a cleaning kit for a rifle and a notebook, wrapped in oilcloth, sitting in the center of it all like an invitation. The sergeant climbed down and picked up the notebook. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, dates and times and grid coordinates, mission logs, patrol routes, German supply schedules, names and ranks of officers, weapon counts, everything a reconnaissance unit would kill to have. And on the last page, a note written in English. To whoever finds this, I am Private First Class Joseph Niche, 2nd Battalion, 7th Infantry Regiment. I was separated from my unit during an engagement near Mignano. On November 12, 1943, I've been operating independently since. I'm not a deserter, I'm not a partisan, I'm completing my mission. If you are reading this, it means I'm either dead or have moved on. Use the information I have gathered. It is accurate. Tell Captain Morris of B Company that I kept my word. Tell him I held the line. The date on the last entry was 3 days ago. The grid coordinates matched their current position almost exactly. He'd known they were coming, had left this for them. Tucked under the bedroll was a dog tag, worn smooth, the lettering barely visible. Niche Joseph, blood type A positive, Catholic. Hold the line, Dietrich said quietly, reading the note again. That was their unit motto. 2nd Battalion, 7th Infantry. They took heavy casualties at Mignano. Most of the battalion was wiped out or captured. But he got away. And instead of trying to make it back to American lines, he'd stayed, behind enemy lines. For 2 months, gathering intelligence. Hitting supply routes, making them bleed. How does one man do this? Was one of the younger privates asked, looking around the camp. How does he survive out here alone, in winter, with Germans everywhere? Training, the sergeant said. And something else. Something you can't teach. The notebook had enough information to justify a dozen missions. Routes for supply convoys. Locations of ammunition dumps. Weak points in defensive perimeters. All documented with the kind of detail that only comes from direct observation. From being there. From taking risks that would make most men fold. We're about halfway through this story, and I need you to understand something. What you've heard so far, the bodies, the ghost stories, the impossible climbing, that's just the surface. Because the question isn't really about how Joseph Niche did what he did. The question is why. Why would a man whose unit had been destroyed, who could have tried to escape back to friendly lines, instead choose to stay behind enemy lines and fight a war completely alone? The answer is in those 3 words he wrote. Hold the line. But to understand what that meant, you need to know what happened on November 12, 1943, and what promise he made in the moments before his entire world fell apart. When the reconnaissance team returned to base camp 4 days later, the sergeant handed the notebook to Captain Hollis along with his report. Hollis read it without comment, then looked up. You saw him? Once, the sergeant said. On a rock face, at night. He knew we were there. Could have engaged, didn't. Why not? I think because we weren't his mission. The Germans are. Hollis closed the notebook. Private First Class Joseph Niche. I'll forward this up the chain. See if we can get him accounted for, brought back in. With respect, sir, I don't think he's coming back. Not until he's done. Done with what? Whatever he promised Captain Morris. Holding the line. 2 weeks later, during a rest rotation, a chaplain found the sergeant, Father Donnelly, an older man with a soft voice and tired eyes. You're the sergeant who found Nish's camp, he said. It wasn't a question. Donnelly had known Father Mulvaney, the company chaplain for Nish's unit. Mulvaney had been killed at Mignano, the same day Nish's battalion was overrun. Good man, Donnelly said. Gave last rites to 18 boys that day before a shell took him. Mulvaney had told Donnelly about Nish months before Mignano. Said he was different from the other men. Quiet, kept to himself. But when things got bad, when the fire was heaviest, he was always the one moving forward. Always the one covering the withdrawal. Mulvaney said Nish told him once that his grandfather had been a scout back in the Apache Wars. Taught him to move through the desert without leaving sign. To read terrain. To hunt. Nish said it was in his blood. Do you believe that, Father? That something like that can be passed down? I believe we're all shaped by where we come from, Donnelly said. And I believe that some men, when pushed to the edge, when everything is stripped away, find something inside themselves they didn't know was there. Nish is living on that edge, the chaplain continued. Has been for months. I pray for him every night. Pray that when this is over, if he survives, he can find his way back. Back to what? To the world, to normalcy, to peace. Donnelly looked away. Men like that, men who've gone that far, who've lived that close to death for that long, sometimes they can't come back. The distance is too great. 2 weeks after the reconnaissance team returned, word came back from intelligence. They'd verified the information in Nish's notebook, cross-referenced it with prisoner interrogations and aerial reconnaissance. It was accurate, all of it, detailed enough to adjust artillery fire and disrupt German supply operations across a 20-mile front. The impact was significant, measurable. One man, operating alone, had gathered intelligence that a full reconnaissance company would have struggled to obtain. But there was no mention of bringing Nish in, no orders to locate him or extract him. Just a note at the bottom of the report, handwritten, probably from someone higher up the chain. Private First Class Nish is considered active and operational. Do not interfere with his mission. Provide support if requested, but do not initiate contact. They knew. They knew he was out there, knew what he was doing, and they were letting him continue. Maybe because the intelligence was too valuable to interrupt. Maybe because they understood that men like Nish don't fit into normal command structures. You can point them at a problem and turn them loose, but you can't control them. You can only hope they stay pointed in the right direction. The evidence of his work continued. A German supply convoy ambushed on a narrow mountain road. Every vehicle disabled with precision charges. Guards dead in their positions. No sign of the attacker. A communications post taken out. Radio equipment smashed. Documents scattered. 6 soldiers down. Same pattern. Same efficiency. Same absence of tracks. The Germans started changing their tactics. Larger patrols. More frequent check-ins. Some units refused to move at night. Others wouldn't leave their fortified positions except in company strength or larger. The psychological impact was spreading, rippling through their lines like a contagion. Der Apache, the ghost who walked through their defenses and killed at will. It was more than just casualties. It was uncertainty. The knowledge that no matter how careful you were, no matter how many men you had with you, there was someone out there who could reach you. One man. No tracks, no warning, no mercy. That's what Joseph Neshi became. Not just a soldier, not just a scout. He became fear itself, moving through the mountains like smoke, striking without warning, vanishing before anyone could respond. Let me take you back to that moment, the third night, the sergeant sitting at the mouth of that cave, the moon nearly full, bright enough to cast shadows. When he first heard the sound, metal on stone, he turned slowly, brought his rifle up, Safety off. I was faint near their bag, every instinct screaming at him that something was wrong. And then he saw him, 70 yards up an impossible rock face, moving in the middle of the night with the kind of ease that only comes from absolute mastery. No hesitation, no fear, just smooth, efficient movement. The man stopped, hanging from the rock face with one hand, and turned his head. They looked at each other across the distance. Two soldiers, same uniform essentially, same walk, different missions. The sergeant had a clear shot, center mass. He could have ended it right there. Should have by any reasonable standard. This was an unaccounted for soldier, operating without orders, killing enemy troops, potentially compromising operations, but he didn't shoot because in that moment, looking at Joseph Nick hanging from that rock face, he understood something. This wasn't a man who'd gone rogue. This wasn't a man who'd lost his mind. This was a man who'd made a promise, the most important promise of his life, and was keeping it, no matter what it cost, no matter how impossible it seemed. The man nodded, just slightly. An acknowledgement, one soldier to another. Then he continued across the rock face and disappeared into the darkness. The sergeant sat there with his heart hammering, and he realized he'd just witnessed something he'd carry with him for the rest of his life. The moment when he'd seen what a human being is capable of when they refuse to quit. When they take a promise and turn it into something absolute. That was Joseph Nish, not a ghost, not a legend, a man who'd been pushed past every limit and had simply kept going. The sergeant never saw Joseph Nish again, never learned what happened to him. The stories kept coming through the spring and summer. German patrols disappearing, supply lines disrupted, officers killed in their sleep. Some said Nish moved north, following the German retreat. Others claimed he'd been captured or killed. A few insisted he was never real at all. The sergeant doesn't know which version is true. Maybe none of them. Maybe all of them. But he knows what he saw on that rock face. And he knows what was in that notebook. Joseph Nish was real. He was out there. And for a few cold months in the Italian mountains, he was exactly what the Germans feared. A ghost, a hunter, a man who'd crossed into a place where normal rules didn't apply. Decades later, the sergeant still thinks about him. Wonders if he made it out. Wonders if he found his way back to the world, or if the distance was too great. He hopes Nish found peace. Hopes the promise he kept was enough. But he also knows that some debts can't be repaid. Some wounds can't be healed. You can hold the line. You can do everything right, everything you promised, everything you swore. And still the cost might be more than you can bear. Joseph Nicker held his line. He did it alone, in the dark, in the cold, against an enemy that outnumbered him 1,000 to 1. That's what one man can do when he refuses to quit. When he takes everything the world throws at him and turns it into fuel. It's remarkable. It's terrifying. And it's something that should never be forgotten. If you made it this far, thank you. Seriously. Videos like this take weeks to research and produce, and they only exist because people like you actually watch them all the way through. Joseph Nish's story isn't in the major documentaries, it's not in the Hollywood films. It's in declassified reports and first-hand accounts that most people will never see. But it deserves to be told, and it deserves to be remembered. If you want more stories like this, stories that dig deeper than the surface, stories about the men who fought in the margins and the shadows, then subscribe. And if you really want to help stories like Joseph Nish's reach more people, share this video. These men gave everything. The least we can do is remember them properly. Remember what they sacrificed. Remember what they became. Hold the line. That was his promise, and for a few cold months in 1944 in the mountains of Italy, he kept it. I'll see you in the next one.